Post 1. I never pictured the phrase "you've been served" applying to my own mother. To be fair, I never pictured any of this. Not the hospital, not the scholarship email, not the binder of screenshots, not sitting in a lawyer's office explaining to a stranger how my family turned one cup of herbal tea into the definition of who I was for 6 years. For anyone who wasn't here the first time, here's the short version. I'm in my mid-20s now. When this all started, I was 19 and in my first year of a kinesiology program with a sports therapy and nutrition focus. I was the health nut of my family. I annoyed people by reading labels and packing meal-prepped containers when everyone else wanted drive-through. My older sister Hannah got pregnant. The house became a shrine to her and the baby. I came home for a weekend with a care package, a mug, prenatal vitamins, and a caffeine-free herbal tea clearly labeled as safe in pregnancy. I made her a cup. That night she miscarried. At the hospital, in front of our parents, she pointed at me and said I had given her something, that I always wanted to experiment on people. My parents decided that meant I killed their grandchild. My mom emailed my program, describing me as someone who had knowingly given unsafe substances to a pregnant woman. My scholarship was revoked, my practicum withdrawn, my parents pulled funding, and I dropped out. For years, everyone repeated the story that I had ruined Hannah's pregnancy. In a family group chat, my mother literally wrote, "Our family's position is that Maya caused this." I moved to a smaller city, got a job at a gym front desk, and tried to build a life around a version of me I didn't recognize. 5 years later, at my dad's funeral, I found out by accident that Hannah had been diagnosed with gestational diabetes in that first pregnancy, that she didn't manage it, and that doctors had repeatedly warned her about the risk to the baby. My aunt had been at an appointment during Hannah's second pregnancy and heard the OB say that poor control of the diabetes had contributed significantly to the first loss. My family knew. For years. They knew the pregnancy was complicated. They knew the doctors did not think a single cup of boxed tea was the magic trigger. And they never called. They never corrected anyone. They kept telling people I killed the baby. That was when I stopped calling it miscommunication in my head and started printing things out. Through my aunt, I ended up in a cramped office with a civil defamation and reputation lawyer named Nina. She read through my binder. Her cheeks flushed a little at certain lines, but she stayed professional, asking for dates, names, and documents. Then she said calmly, "If the documentation holds up the way it looks here, I would take this on contingency. In plain terms, I only get paid if we win or settle, and I do not take cases I think are hopeless." That was a few months ago. Since then, things have moved from theoretical to real. First were the letters. Nina sent formal demand letters to my mother and to Hannah, setting out exactly what we alleged, that they had made false statements of fact about me causing the miscarriage, presented those statements as truth to my university, scholarship committee, church, and extended family, and that I'd lost educational and career opportunities and suffered reputational and emotional harm. My mother responded to the letter by texting me in all caps about spitting on your father's grave and trying to cash in. Nina told me not to answer and added the text to the file. Next was the choice: file an actual lawsuit or just keep negotiating. "If we file," Nina said, "this stops being family drama and becomes a public record. They will be served. There will be case numbers. They can't pretend you're just threatening anymore. But once we cross that line, you have to be prepared for them to escalate emotionally." "What happens if we don't file?" I asked. "Best case," she said. "They offer some vague private apology that doesn't repair your reputation or losses. Worst case, they keep doing what they've been doing, telling anyone who'll listen that you killed a baby and now you're harassing them for money." "Will filing magically fix my life?" I asked. "No," she said. "But it puts you in a process with rules, evidence, timelines, and a neutral decision maker. Right now, your mother is judge, jury, and narrator. This is the only way to change that." So we filed. That meant drafting a statement of claim, listing defendants, itemizing damages, seeing my life reduced to defamation, emotional distress, and economic loss. bullet points was surreal. When the paperwork was accepted, there was a case number with my name on it. Then came service. I was at work when my mother got served. I know because my cousin Mia texted, "I think it just happened. Process server at the door. Mom is screaming." Half an hour later, my phone lit up with texts from an unknown number that I recognized immediately. "How could you humiliate me like this?" The neighbors saw. "You are suing your own mother. You are not my daughter anymore." I screenshotted them, sent them to Nina, and did not reply. Hannah's reaction was public. She posted about being betrayed twice by someone who already took one child from me, and lawsuits from people who care more about careers than family. She didn't use my name. She didn't have to. Within a day, my DMs were full. "How could you do this to your mom after everything? Your dad would be rolling in his grave. Lawsuits are for enemies, not family." A few messages said the opposite, that they were glad I was standing up for myself, that my family should have stopped blaming me when the doctor explained things. Those were quieter. Mostly, I felt like I had detonated a bomb under a bridge I'd already watched burn. I keep going to work, I keep packing lunches, I keep going to therapy, where my therapist reminds me that letting a court look at something doesn't automatically make me the bad guy. Still, there's a little voice in my head that sounds like my mother, saying I've proven her right, that I care more about being right and getting what I want than about family. So that's where part 2 starts, with formal papers that say my own mother and sister lied about me, handed to them by strangers at their door. My mother says I've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. Now that I've actually filed a lawsuit naming my own family, am I the jerk? Update 1. I think part of me expected a lawsuit to feel like TV, big dates circled on the calendar, dramatic speeches, somebody yelling objection. In reality, it mostly feels like paperwork and waiting. After my mother and sister were served, things went quiet on their side except for the occasional all-caps text or vague betrayal post. The noise moved into email chains between lawyers and document requests, with words like discovery and interrogatories that sounded like they belonged in some corporate case, not my family. Nina explained discovery in plain language. "Both sides," she said, "have to put their cards on the table. We ask your old school and scholarship board for their records. We ask your mother and sister for anything they've written or said about you and the miscarriage. They can ask for your communications and academic file. It's not glamorous, but it's where a lot of cases are actually decided." I signed consents for the university to release my file. I forwarded every email I had from my program, the scholarship committee, my mother, and screenshots of Hannah's posts. Nina slowly built a digital fortress of PDFs. A few weeks later, the first big batch arrived, from my old school. Nina printed the key documents and asked me to come in. There was a stack on the table with my name on the tabs. "Ready?" she asked. "Define ready," I said, but I sat. She slid the first email over. It was from my mother to the dean and my program director, dated 3 days after the miscarriage. Subject line, "My daughter is a danger to patients." I knew the gist of what she'd said. Seeing it in writing still hit differently. She had written, "My younger daughter Maya knowingly administered an unsafe herbal concoction to her pregnant sister without her doctor's knowledge or consent. The result was fetal loss. I am horrified that someone training in a health field would experiment on a pregnant woman. I urge you to reconsider whether she is fit for any role involving vulnerable people." "This," Nina said, tapping it, cheeks already pink, "is not, 'My daughter is struggling, please help her.' This is a direct accusation of intentional harm, framed as fact, sent to people who control your academic future." Next was an internal email chain between the dean, my program director, and student affairs. It used phrases like serious allegation, concerns about fitness to practice, family alleges intentional harm. One line made my stomach twist. My program director wrote, "Student admitted to giving unregulated substances to a pregnant relative, resulting in miscarriage. Regardless of intent, huge red flag." I remembered telling him it was a boxed tea labeled pregnancy safe, and realizing that by the time I sat in that office, they had already translated that into unregulated substances and huge red flag. The scholarship committee had a note. Due to ongoing investigation into allegations, student intentionally harmed a pregnant family member through experimental herbal interventions, we recommend immediate suspension of award pending resolution. Experimental herbal interventions. That made a mug in a living room sound like a lab trial. Did they ever ask you for your side in writing? Nina asked. No, I said. Just that one meeting. Then an email saying my scholarship was revoked. She nodded. Good. That shows they acted on your mother's statements without real verification. On one level, I felt vindicated. I hadn't exaggerated what my mom did. On another level, seeing my professors' names above danger to patients made me want to throw up. We also got family documents. Through their lawyer, my mother and sister produced Hannah's original Facebook post. I trusted someone who cared more about trying their wellness experiments than about my child. I lost everything because of a cup of tea. No, I believe. No, I think. Just cause and effect, presented as fact. Once the document flood slowed, the next word on the list was deposition. Think of it as a formal interview under oath, Nina said. Their lawyer asks you questions. I sit next to you. There's a court reporter. No judge in the room, but everything is recorded. She ran me through practice questions. Why did you bring the tea? Because I thought it would help her relax and sleep. Did you think there was any risk to the baby? No. It was a widely sold pregnancy-safe herbal tea. I read the box and showed it to her and my parents. Did you want to hurt your sister? The first time she asked that one in practice, I just stammered. She said, short answer. No. You don't have to give a speech. By the time my real deposition came, I felt rehearsed, but still terrified. Their lawyer tried the jealousy angle. Did you resent your sister for being pregnant while you were still in school? Tried the experimenting angle. Do you research alternative remedies? Tried the funeral angle. So you confronted your grieving mother and accused her of lying? I answered as we'd practiced. I was happy for her. I bought a boxed tea from a chain store. I asked why no one told me about the gestational diabetes. It was exhausting, but at least I walked out knowing what I'd said. What rattled me more was Hannah's deposition, which I wasn't in the room for. Nina called afterward. She stuck to her script at first, Nina said. Healthy until the tea, you always wanted to try things on her. Lots of emphasis on stress and trust. Of course, I said. Under questioning, she admitted the gestational diabetes diagnosis, Nina continued. Tried to minimize it. Just a bit of sugar. So I walked her through the chart. Missed appointments, non-compliance with diet, declining insulin. She admitted those conversations happened. My stomach turned. And then, Nina said, voice tightening slightly, I asked if she'd ever told anyone it was easier for everyone to blame you than to look at her numbers. She admitted saying something like that to a coworker. We'll have that coworker on the stand if we need to. I sat there on my bed, phone pressed to my ear, feeling like my brain had pulled up two images of Hannah that wouldn't line up. The devastated big sister in the hospital bed and the woman who told someone it was easier to let everyone blame me. The school's lawyer then reached out to explore resolution, which Nina translated as, they see the problem and want to limit the damage. Nothing is finalized yet, but it's the first time anyone from that institution has even hinted they might have overreacted. I know none of this brings the baby back or gives me my early 20s. But there is a small, tired part of me that feels a grim satisfaction watching people and institutions who stamped dangerous on my file suddenly start scrambling when someone finally asks them to prove it. Then the guilt kicks in. My mother's voice, you care more about being right than about family. My dad's imagined voice, I wouldn't want my girls fighting like this. So now that I've seen the emails where my professors and scholarship board wrote me off based on my mother's story, and I'm watching them scramble under legal pressure, am I the jerk for feeling any satisfaction at all? And for not dropping the whole thing out of compassion for the people who helped light the match? Update 2. If Update 1 was realizing how badly the system failed me, Update 2 was watching it quietly try to repair itself. The first crack came from the university. Nina called, We've got an email from their counsel. Can you come in? Her voice was neutral in that deliberate way she uses when she doesn't want to steer me. She had 2 folders, school and family. We'll start with the easier one, she said, tapping school. The university's lawyer had sent a letter. They disputed any intentional wrongdoing, but, in the interest of amicable resolution, they were prepared to remove any notes or flags from my record about misconduct, unprofessional behavior, or fitness to practice. Update my transcript to show I left the program in good standing, eligible to reapply without prejudice. Provide a letter to any future institution stating I left for personal reasons and had not been found responsible for any conduct breach. Pay a sum in recognition of disruption to educational trajectory, roughly equivalent to what my revoked scholarship would have covered, plus a bit. In exchange, they wanted a full release of claims against the school and scholarship board, and a standard NDA on the specifics. They're not saying, "We were wrong to believe your mother," Nina said, but they're rolling back the practical consequences of that assumption. That's the concession. I ran my finger over good standing and no disciplinary record. After years of knowing they'd quietly labeled me a huge red flag, it felt surreal to see them now offering paperwork saying the opposite. "And the money?" I asked. "It's not full compensation for everything you lost," Nina said, "but it's solid for a first offer. The real value is reputational. Getting them to agree in writing that you did not commit misconduct matters more long-term than squeezing them for a bit more." I asked about the NDA. She shrugged. "You won't be able to share the exact dollar figure, but you'll be free to say you settled, your record was cleared, and correct the lie that you were dismissed for harming a patient." 19-year-old me would have wanted a public apology in the campus paper. The me sitting in that office mostly wanted to be able to apply to school again without lying. "I'll take it," I said. "If we can nudge the amount slightly, great, but I want that letter." Nina pushed back. They increased the amount. Within a few weeks, I had a registrar's letter stating I left voluntarily for personal reasons and had no record of misconduct. Dry, official, and the opposite of what my mother had implied. That was the easy file. Then we opened family. Their lawyer proposed a private family resolution. My mother would acknowledge that grief may have colored her perception and that multiple factors likely contributed to the miscarriage. She'd make a brief statement at church and on Facebook that no one can say with certainty that any one action caused the loss. In exchange, I would drop all claims, agree not to discuss Hannah's medical history, meaning no mention of gestational diabetes, agree not to publish anything suggesting our family lied, and promise not to pursue any future legal or public action related to the miscarriage or fallout. No money, no retraction of "Maya caused this," just a soft, blurry, "we were all hurting" statement and a gag order for me. Translated, Nina said, jaw tight. They're offering to vaguely soften the story in ways that protect them, while you give up your leverage and agree never to contradict them again. She'd get to say, "No one really knows what happened," I said, and I'd have to shut up about the part where she knew it wasn't me. "Exactly," Nina said. "This is PR, not accountability." "If I say yes?" I asked. "We drop the case against them," she said. "You keep the university settlement, but lose any chance of family damages. If they backslide later, you'll have almost no recourse." "And if I say no?" "Then we keep going," she said. "More hearings, more prep. We make it clear that vague regret isn't enough." It would be so easy to let her tell the "we all made mistakes" story. That's the one my family likes. No specifics, just mutual fog. But what actually happened was that my mother wrote, "My daughter is a danger to patients, and our family's position is that Maya caused this," then kept saying it after she knew about the diabetes. What actually happened is that I lost a career path and a relationship with my dad because it was easier for them if I was the one at fault. "I can live with the school settlement being quiet," I said. "They're an institution. I just need them off my back. But my mother isn't paying me to keep her secret. She's been getting paid in my reputation for 6 years." Nina's expression softened. "So your answer is?" she asked. "No deal," I said. "Not unless she can say, 'Maya did not cause the miscarriage.' If she can't say that, we keep going." Nina nodded. "Then we proceed." So that's where we are. I accepted the institutional settlement with an NDA, but I turned down my family's vague non-apology and gag order. We're heading toward more hearings, more depositions, maybe trial. From the outside, does that make me the jerk? Choosing a courtroom and a clear retraction over a softer, private, let's forget the details piece? Update 3. If the early stages felt like homework, the first day in an actual courtroom felt like a field trip to somewhere I never wanted to visit. It wasn't trial. It was a motion hearing. My mother and Hannah's lawyer had filed to throw the case out, calling it family disputes dressed up as defamation, and saying anything they'd said was opinion or protected grief. Nina refused to let that stand unchallenged. She prepped me for weeks on what to expect. I still almost turned around when I saw my mother at the other table. She looked smaller, but harder. Hannah sat beside her, perfectly put together, hands clenched. Neither of them looked at me. "You won't be speaking," Nina whispered. "You're here to watch." Their lawyer argued first, painting them as devastated women, expressing pain, saying no reasonable person would treat their statements as medical fact. Then Nina stood. She didn't shout. She just walked through the record. "Your Honor, this is not someone saying, 'I feel like my sister hurt me,'" she said. "This is a pattern of clear statements that my client caused a miscarriage by experimenting on a pregnant woman." These statements were presented as fact to a university, a scholarship board, and a community, and they continued after the defendants knew about medical information that contradicted their narrative. She submitted the group chat message where my mother wrote, "Our family's position is that Maya caused this, years after the loss and after the diabetes diagnosis." "That is not raw grief," Nina said. "That is a formal declaration of blame." The judge glanced at the page. "And you have medical records suggesting other contributing factors?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Nina said. "Charts and notes identifying uncontrolled gestational diabetes and missed appointments as significant factors. We also have testimony from someone who heard the OB explain this to the defendants, who then chose not to adjust what they told others." That was the testimony I'd been bracing for. The coworker, Tasha. She looked nervous on the stand, but answered clearly. Nina asked if she'd worked with Hannah during the pregnancy. She had. Did Hannah talk about diet and appointments? Yes, she joked about cheating on the diet, skipping appointments, and not giving up fast food. After the miscarriage, had Hannah talked about blame? Yes, Tasha said. She told me her family was blaming her sister because of some tea. I asked if she really thought it was the tea. She said, "It's easier this way. They'd never forgive me if they knew how bad my numbers actually were." The room went very still. On cross-examination, their lawyer tried to shake it, questioned her memory, suggested she misheard. Tasha didn't change her answer. During a break, I passed my mother and Hannah in the hallway. Hannah was crying, saying, "They're making me sound like I wanted it," and my mother snapped back, "This is about your sister trying to destroy us." My mother spotted me and stepped in front of Hannah like I was a threat. "Are you happy now?" she hissed. "Dragging strangers here to tear your sister apart? Is this what you wanted?" Nina's voice in my head. "Don't engage." I walked back into the courtroom without answering. When the judge returned with his ruling, his tone was calm, but his words felt like the floor finally leveling. The motion to dismiss was denied. He said in more formal language that attributing the cause of a miscarriage solely to my actions, stated as fact to third parties and institutions, in the face of medical records showing multiple factors, is exactly the kind of statement that can be actionable if false. It was not the court's role at this stage to excuse it as mere opinion or grief. We walked out with the case alive. They walked out looking like someone had taken away their script. I felt vindicated. I also felt sick seeing my sister sobbing, reliving the worst day of her life under fluorescent lights. But then I think about watching my worst day turned into a morality tale, where I was the one everyone decided had chosen it. And that sympathy hits a limit. So after hearing Tasha say out loud that it was easier to blame me, and hearing the judge refuse to sweep this under the rug, Am I the jerk for not calling it off now that the point has been made? And instead letting the case continue, even though it means my sister has to sit with what she said in more than just a family chat? Update 4. After the motion hearing, everyone suddenly started pretending this was a minor misunderstanding instead of the entire structure of my life. My mother's texts spiked for a week, long messages about me attacking a grieving mother and parading strangers to humiliate Hannah. I forwarded them to Nina and muted her number. Then silence. No more vague posts, no more cousins quoting my mom, no more pray for us in this time of persecution statuses. Nina said, that's their lawyer telling them this isn't going away if they cry harder. A couple of weeks later, we got a revised settlement proposal, family defendants. This one is different, Nina said when I came in. They're scared. The offer, a formal written statement signed by my mother and Hannah, to be posted on my mother's Facebook, read at church, and sent to the extended family email list and Grandma Squad chat. The statement would retract prior claims that I caused, killed, or was responsible for the miscarriage. Acknowledge that medical professionals later identified poorly controlled gestational diabetes and other complications as significant factors, and clarify they do not believe I intentionally harmed Hannah or the baby. A monetary payment to me for emotional and reputational harm, more money than I've ever had, enough to change my situation, but not cartoonishly huge. A promise not to make any future statements attributing the miscarriage to my actions. In exchange, I'd drop the lawsuit against them, agree not to seek more damages, and acknowledge that grief was a factor in how they acted, without saying grief excused it. What's missing? I asked. Nina pointed to a line. They still wanted to avoid the word wrong. They were trying to phrase it as, we may have been mistaken, or we now understand things were more complex. I've told them we need an unambiguous sentence, Nina said. Something like, we were wrong to say that Maya's actions caused the miscarriage. That's the whole point. What if they refuse? I asked. Then we keep going, she said. But my sense is, after the motion hearing, their appetite for risk is low. We went back and forth through the lawyers. For a while, the sticking point was exactly what you'd expect. My mother didn't want to put in writing that she'd been wrong. She wanted to hide behind, no one can know for sure. Eventually, we got a revised draft. In the middle of the statement, in plain text, was, we were wrong to say that Maya's actions caused the miscarriage, and we want to state clearly that we do not believe she intentionally or unintentionally caused the loss of our grandchild. We also got them to delete a sentence about the T maybe being a contributing factor. I read that one sentence over and over. They had spent years insisting they'd done nothing but tell the truth, and now they were agreeing to sign and publish a line that said they were wrong. We signed the settlement. My case against them was discontinued. The school part was already wrapped, my record scrubbed, my scholarship revocation quietly acknowledged as premature, and a check on the way. Now there was a second check from my own family. It was enough to pay off old debt, put money aside for school, and build a small safety net. It would hurt them, but not destroy them. Not annihilation, Nina had said. Consequence. Then came the public part. On a Sunday night, Mia sent me a screenshot of my mother's Facebook. The post was long, full of grief language, and we all say things we regret. But there in the middle was, over the years, in our anger and heartbreak, we have said things that put the blame for our first loss on our daughter Maya. We were wrong to say that Maya's actions caused the miscarriage, and we want to state clearly that we do not believe she intentionally or unintentionally caused the loss of our grandchild. There were medical complications, including gestational diabetes, that we did not talk about at the time, and the situation was far more complex than we presented it. Aunt Linda confirmed my mother had read a shorter version at church. The family email and Grandma Squad chat carried the same paragraph. Reactions were divided. Some relatives wrote, "Thank you for your honesty," and messaged me privately to apologize for believing the worst. One said, "I always had doubts. I'm glad you kept pushing." Others focused on my mother. "You shouldn't have had to go to court to say this. one cousin wrote to me. She's been through enough. Another asked to my face, was it worth putting your mom through all that? My mother sent me one text. I hope you're satisfied now. I didn't reply. Am I satisfied? Not in the dramatic sense. There was no victory dance in my kitchen. Watching my mother force the words out wasn't joyful. But I am quieter inside. I have, in their own signatures, the sentence I spent 6 years being told I didn't deserve. We were wrong to say that Maya caused this. I have enough financial stability to move forward. And I have the ability, if this ever comes up, to hand over documents instead of begging people to believe me. My mother still tells people privately that I sued her for money over a dead baby. I know, because relatives have sent me screenshots. The difference now is that someone can answer, you also told everyone she killed the baby when that wasn't true, and you had to correct it. Her story is no longer the only one. So, I took the settlement. My record is cleared. My family is permanently cracked. I didn't get reconciliation or total ruin, just a public retraction and a check. From the outside, does that make me the jerk for accepting this as the ending instead of pushing for a full trial or some impossible emotional repair? Final update, 1 year later. It's been a little over a year since I signed the papers, and my mother stood in front of a room full of people and said, we were wrong to say that Maya's actions caused the miscarriage. I said before that I didn't feel satisfied in the way my mother meant. That's still true. There's no rush of triumph. Mostly it feels like I finally got to put down a heavy box I'd been carrying since I was 19. People keep asking what after looks like. The money did what it was supposed to. I paid off every lingering cent of debt from my aborted degree and the scramble years. I built a decent emergency fund and a school fund. I finished my community college certificate in exercise science. For the first time since everything blew up, I let myself fill out applications for an actual degree again. Different university, different city. I attached the registrar's letter saying I left my old program in good standing and have no misconduct record. I was accepted into an exercise physiology program on a part-time track. I'll be older than most of my classmates, and it will take longer, but this time I'm paying on my own terms. No one can yank support because of a family drama. At the gym, I'm no longer just front desk girl who knows a lot. I run a beginner strength class twice a week and assist with programming. When clients ask how I learned all this, I can say, I was studying kinesiology before life derailed. I'm going back now. If they ever decided to Google me, they would see corrected information, not one-sided accusations. Family-wise, it's simple. I'm essentially no contact with my mother and Hannah. I haven't blocked them or made a big speech. I just don't initiate contact, and I only respond to neutral, practical messages. In a year, there have been maybe 3. A group text about a relative's surgery, a photo of my dad's headstone, a Christmas group shot. I responded, thank you once. That's it. I hear about them mostly via Aunt Linda and Mia, who are actively in my life. We go for coffee when they're in town. They send me pictures of my niece, who is now full of opinions about cartoons and wants to show me every drawing she does over video chat. Someday she'll hear pieces of this story. What matters to me now is that there is a factual record she can see if she wants it. The settlement forced some practical changes for my mother and Hannah. They refinanced the house. They cut back on extras. The trip my mother had been planning got delayed. She complains to anyone who'll listen that she's paying for telling the truth. But they are not destitute. My niece isn't going without food or clothes. This didn't ruin their lives. It just stopped them from ruining mine without consequence. Socially, the retraction shook their circle. Some people accepted it and apologized. Others insist my mother was forced to say it. A few have tried the, we always knew you didn't mean it, dear line with me, and I've learned how to nod and change the subject. Nina has quietly become a legend in my world. When someone at the gym mentioned a friend being smeared by an ex-boss, I said, I might have a name for you. His cousin had used the same lawyer. Apparently, there is a whole unofficial network of people whose reputations were shredded and who decided not to just take it. People sometimes ask if I'd do it all again, knowing the time, cost, and fallout. Honestly, yes. Not for revenge. Not to hurt my mother. I would do it again because the alternative was living the rest of my life as the girl who destroyed her sister's baby over a mug of tea, with nothing but my own word to counter it. In my field, that kind of story sticks in ways that, oh, turns out it was more complicated, whispered years later, does not. I did not get a tearful reconciliation or a mother who suddenly chose me over being right. My sister hasn't apologized. My dad died before he could see any of this. What I got instead was documentation and a chance to rebuild. I have paper that says I did not commit misconduct. Paper where my mother and sister say, in their own words, that I did not cause the miscarriage. Paper that came with enough money to step back onto the path I was shoved off. It's not pretty. It's not emotional closure. It's solid. My mother says I destroyed the family and that no good daughter would do what I did. She insists no statement or settlement can make me a good person again in her eyes. The difference now is that I finally accept that her eyes are not the only ones that count. So, for this last update, am I the jerk for choosing a future built on court documents and hard boundaries instead of sacrificing the rest of my life to keep playing the role my family wrote for me when I was 19? Me when I was 19. Me when I was 19. Me when